In the shadow of Mount Parnassus, where olive trees whispered secrets to the wind and the nightingales sang only in moonlight, there lay a forgotten village called Theras, shielded from the world by cliffs and dense groves. The villagers believed themselves blessed by the gods, or perhaps hidden from their wrath. Theras had no temples, only a single altar of white marble at its heart, where no priest ever spoke and no sacrifice was ever seen. It was said that the marble once wept blood when the stars fell, but no one knew when that was. The villagers lived by old ways, guided by dreams and omens, and when the wind changed direction, they turned their faces to the ground in reverence. Among them lived a boy named Kallistratos, whose eyes shimmered like quicksilver and whose dreams were far too loud. From the moment he could walk, he spoke of shadows behind the sun and of voices beneath the soil. The elders watched him with a mix of fear and awe, for he seemed marked. Whether by Apollo's touch or by something far older, none could say. His mother, a healer, often found him sleepwalking to the altar at night, his arms raised toward the stars, as if in silent pleading. On the eve of his 16th year, when a moon hung red and full above the Pindus Mountains, he awoke with a word on his lips, Elysiara. No one knew what it meant, but the earth trembled slightly as he spoke it, and the olive trees bent as if listening. Kallistratos could not remember the dream itself, only the sensation it left behind, a thundering silence, a warmth like fire beneath the ocean, and the sound of wings beating across a sky that did not belong to this world. The name, Elysiara, lingered on his tongue like the taste of pomegranate seeds, both sweet and bitter. That morning, the sun refused to rise on time, and a pale mist clung to the ground, curling around the villagers' feet like serpents. The elders gathered in silence at the marble altar, each bearing offerings of salt, honey, and black feathers, gifts not meant for the Olympians, but for the forgotten. When Kallistratos arrived, the mist parted for him, coiling away from his skin. The oldest among them, Theon the Dreamkeeper, looked into his eyes and shivered. "The veil thins," he whispered, and placed a small obsidian shard into the boy's hand. It was warm to the touch. That night, Kallistratos sat by the fire as his mother stirred herbs, whispering protective chants in an ancient tongue. But no charm could silence what now stirred within him. In the flame's reflection, he saw glimpses of a temple buried beneath sands that glowed like embers, of statues with bleeding eyes, and of a woman crowned with starlight, her mouth forming words he could not yet understand. His heart raced not with fear, but with a strange sense of belonging. Something had awakened, and it was calling him by name. On the 7th night after his dream, Kallistratos followed the call of the obsidian shard. He carried it in a leather pouch, and it pulsed faintly with warmth, like a hidden heartbeat. The moon was a silver coin in the sky, and the path before him seemed to unfold of its own accord, twisting past ancient cypress trees and crumbled boundary stones long swallowed by moss. His feet moved without thought, drawn by the pull of something older than memory. He passed through a grove where the air grew still and thick with the scent of myrrh. At its center stood a forgotten shrine, cracked and overgrown, bearing no symbol but a single eye carved in the stone. As he approached, a low hum filled the grove, resonating through his bones. The shard grew hotter, and suddenly, a voice not his own spoke from his mouth. "I see you." The words echoed unnaturally, as though spoken by countless voices in unison. The earth trembled, and the altar before him split open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below smelled of dust, salt, and ancient secrets. Kallistratos hesitated, heart pounding, then stepped into the shadows, the shard lighting his way with a dim violet glow. The descent seemed endless. The steps spiraled deeper than any structure should allow, carved from obsidian veined with silver. The further he went, the quieter the world above became, until even the sound of his breath felt foreign. At last, the staircase opened into a vast chamber lit by an unseen glow. Towering statues lined the perimeter, figures with the bodies of men and the faces of beasts, their eyes inlaid with jet and gold. A river of black water flowed silently through the center, its surface still as glass. Kallistratos crossed a narrow bridge, and as he did, he saw himself in the water, not as he was, but crowned with thorns of starlight, his eyes hollow and filled with swirling galaxies. A voice echoed again, now from the air itself. "You have entered the hollow of seeing." The chamber pulsed with a presence, and before him rose a dais upon which rested a book bound in skinless hide. When he touched it, his mind unraveled. He saw visions of an age before Olympus, when the Titans knelt to an unseen queen cloaked in twilight, and of a veil between worlds that had once torn, letting the old ones whisper to mortal hearts. When Kallistratos awoke, he was outside the shrine, the sun barely cresting the horizon. The obsidian shard was gone, replaced by a faint burn mark in his palm, shaped like a spiral. He could remember fragments of what the book had shown him. Visions of the goddess who reigned beyond the stars, whose name was forbidden even among the Moirai. The veil between worlds, he now knew, was weakening, and he was its fulcrum. Upon returning to Theras, he found the village changed. The birds no longer sang, and the river that once flowed near the fields had dried overnight. The elders avoided his gaze, their faces drawn tight with fear. His mother touched his cheek and whispered, "They've seen your soul." That night, the stars over Theras began to shift. They twisted into unnatural alignments, forming eyes and serpents and crowns. Children cried in their sleep, and animals refused to eat. The veil was indeed thinning, and the hollow of seeing had left its mark. From that moment on, every shadow seemed to move, and every silence spoke a name he dared not repeat. The goddess began to visit him in dreams, not as a figure of beauty, but as a towering shadow wrapped in the cosmos, her form ever shifting between flame, mist, and starlight. She never spoke directly, but her presence flooded his mind with knowledge, of doorways that led nowhere and yet everywhere, of names that could bind fate itself, and of a time before time. One night, she showed him a vision of Theras burning, of its people screaming not in pain, but in revelation. In their cries, he heard her name, Elysiara. Waking with sweat-soaked skin and trembling limbs, he found his room filled with white moths. They covered the walls and ceiling, utterly silent, their wings shimmering with stardust. He knew then that the veil was no longer thinning, it was tearing. That day, he climbed to the top of Mount Parnassus, where the oracle of old once spoke in riddles and flame. There, among the cracked stones and forgotten incense bowls, he sat and called out her name under a blood-red sun. The mountain did not answer, but the sky darkened in reply, and from the horizon came the sound of flutes playing a melody too ancient for human hands. The melody echoed in his bones for days. It followed him through waking hours, a haunting tune that unraveled time around him. Kallistratos stopped aging. His reflection no longer blinked when he did. The villagers began whispering about the curse of the stargazer. They claimed he brought the drought, the dying crops, the cracked earth. His mother, now frail and gray within a week, begged him to leave Theras. "You are the key and the gate," she whispered, coughing blood into her hands. But where could he go? The world beyond was closing its doors. Messengers from Delphi came bearing omens, dead birds in sealed jars, their eyes replaced with tiny obsidian beads. The high priest of Apollo, once proud and golden-robed, now wore black linen and spoke only in riddles. When the last flame forgets its name, she shall step through. The goddess Elysiara was no longer hiding. Her will seeped into dreams across Hellas, and poets began tearing their own tongues out to escape the verses she whispered. Kallistratos, torn between fear and awe, knew his transformation was far from complete. That night, as he stood atop the village altar, the moon cracked like an egg, spilling silver across the sky. With the moon's fracture came the return of ancient things. Creatures from forgotten tales slithered into being. Serpents with human eyes, owls that wept black sap, and children born with no mouths, only eyes. The barrier between worlds had become translucent. Ghosts wandered openly now, asking questions no one dared answer. Kallistratos left Theras, wrapped in a gray cloak woven by his mother from funeral thread. He walked for 3 nights under skies that bled constellations. On the 4th, he arrived at the ruins of Acheron's mouth, the river of sorrow. But the river was dry, its ferryman absent, his boat cracked and moss-covered. Instead, a woman stood at the edge of the gorge, cloaked in veils that shimmered like the northern lights. Her face was empty, literally, as if forgotten by time. She reached for him, and without words, he offered his spiral-marked hand. She pressed a coin not of gold, but of memory into his palm, and he remembered lifetimes not his own. When he blinked again, he stood on the other side of the gorge, beneath a sky with no stars, only one large, pulsing eye overhead. The land beyond the gorge was not of mortal making. Trees there sang in reversed tongues, their leaves made of whispers. The ground pulsed like a heartbeat, and light came from nowhere and everywhere at once. This was the threshold, a place between being and unbeing. Kallistratos wandered, neither hungry nor tired, guided by the coin of memory, which now glowed softly against his chest. Here, time did not exist as he knew it. A minute could last a year, and a century could pass in the blink of a sigh. He met others, figures without faces, echoes of those who had crossed too soon or too late. One spoke in a voice like bells. You are the bridge. But bridges fall. It offered him a mirror of polished bone. In it, he saw himself again, older, crowned in flame, his spiral mark now a full circle burning through his chest. He wept without knowing why. Then the air rippled, and the earth beneath his feet gave way, pulling him down into the true temple of Elysiara, where no god dared tread. The temple had no walls, no roof, no pillars, only void. Kallistratos floated through a space stitched from starlight and silence, where thought itself created structure. Shapes flickered into being as he moved. Stairs formed beneath his feet, arches rose and dissolved in mist, and at the heart of it all stood a throne of black crystal, cracked but radiant. Upon it sat Elysiara. She bore no fixed form. Her face changed with every blink. A child, a crone, a soldier, a serpent, a star. Her voice entered not through ears, but directly into bone. You carry the wound of memory, she said. You are not meant to be born now. You are a correction. The throne pulsed with cosmic sorrow. She extended her hand, and from her palm fell a single black feather. As it landed in Kallistratos' palm, it burst into flame, then folded into his skin. He screamed, not in pain, but in transformation. His body convulsed, and when he stood again, his eyes no longer reflected the world, but consumed it. He could now see the threads of fate, pulsing like silver veins through reality. He had become the herald, not of a god, but of something far older, something whose gaze even gods avoided. The transformation was not only spiritual, it echoed across the mortal realm. Back in Theras, the villagers fell into dreamless sleep, their bodies frozen in mid-breath. The altar cracked open, releasing tendrils of light that spiraled into the heavens. Delphi burned in golden fire, and the Sibyl prophesied with a voice not her own, declaring, "The eye has opened, and the name forgotten shall be remembered." Across Hellas, temples crumbled, rivers ran backward, and masks fell from statues, revealing new faces beneath, older, crueler. Kallistratos now saw the pattern beneath chaos. The world was a tapestry, and Elysiara had begun pulling threads. As Herald, he could alter the weave. He returned to the threshold and stood above Theras, hovering in the sky like a living omen. With a gesture, he closed his fist, and time around the village stopped, preserved in amber light. This was mercy, he told himself. But mercy is a blade, double-edged. For every moment he froze, another began to unravel somewhere else. He had power, but power feeds on purpose, and his had only just begun to form. The gods took notice. Hermes wept silver tears. Athena placed her helm upon the Parthenon's steps and vanished. Even Hades trembled beneath the earth, his shades whispering of the herald who walked between threads. Olympus, once aloof, now stirred in fear. Kallistratos was summoned not by invitation, but by necessity. He arrived at Mount Olympus not by road, but by walking across the night sky itself. The gods sat in council, their thrones empty of warmth. Zeus, ever proud, dared speak first. You were made, not born. What do you want, child of the in-between? Kallistratos answered, to remember what the world chose to forget. He raised his hand, and behind him unfolded a scroll of time, showing empires erased, cities buried by divine shame, gods who had been swallowed to make room for others. The Olympians recoiled at their own secrets. Artemis wept. Poseidon roared. But Elysiara's name had already sunk into their bones. Kallistratos did not threaten. He reminded, and in that reminder was something worse than wrath: accountability. Olympus could not contain him. Kallistratos left the council, not by foot, but through a door made of silence, stepping into realms older than myth. He wandered the ashen fields, where the dreams of extinct gods still burned like dying stars. There he met Nazil, a being formed of forgotten prayers, who taught him the names of stars that no longer existed. In the caves of second birth, he listened to echoes of fates that never came to pass. Every place he entered revealed fragments of Elysiara's design, threads of creation not woven into the known world, but held in reserve, like truths too sharp to speak. With each revelation, his spiral mark deepened, bleeding black light. In a city without doors, where mortals sleep forever in perfect dreams, he found a mirror of himself, another Kallistratos, one who had chosen not to follow the vision. That version had grown old, broken, safe. The Herald looked into his counterpart's eyes and whispered, "We are what remains when choice is taken away." The dream Kallistratos faded, and the real one walked on, alone, but now certain. There was no turning back, only unraveling forward. The unraveling began subtly. Mountains wept sand. Oceans rose and receded like breath. Statues across Hellas began to speak, reciting verses in a language that hadn't been heard since before the Titans. Kallistratos now moved outside the boundary of time, his presence causing shifts in reality. Wherever he walked, prophecy lost meaning. What once was certain now fractured into possibility. People began carving spirals into stone, into trees, into their own skin, drawn by a longing they couldn't name. Cults emerged in his wake, devotees not of worship, but of remembrance. They lit fires that burned without smoke and sang songs whose notes cut through illusion. Kallistratos did not lead them. He didn't speak at all, but they followed. He became a walking rift in the pattern of the world. In dreams, mortals saw the stars rearranging into his name. In waking, they forgot what day it was. And still, the veil thinned. Elysiara's voice now hummed beneath every breath, and the question grew louder. Was he her creation or her undoing? In the end, it was not Elysiara who spoke, but the world itself. The trees wept ink. The winds carried voices of unborn poets. And in the center of the once mortal land, where Theras had stood, a tower of light erupted, spiral-shaped, pulsing like a heartbeat. Kallistratos stood before it, now neither boy nor man, his eyes twin voids holding entire epics. The cults gathered, the gods watched from distant heavens, and the forgotten creatures of the hollow stirred. From within the tower came the sound of breathing, not his own, but the world's. This was the loom of return, where all stories were spun and ended. He reached out his hand, and the spiral mark flared one final time. In that instant, every story ever told collapsed into one moment, one breath, one thread. He could rewrite it all, but instead he let it be. For memory, once awakened, should never be controlled. He turned, not away from the tower, but into it, becoming not a god, not a hero, but a memory woven into the world itself, forever watching, forever whispering. Time passed, though it no longer moved forward. Across Hellas, people began to speak of the whisper. They claimed it came in the moments between sleep and waking, or in the stillness between thunder and silence. The whisper told no fortunes, gave no commands. It only reminded of losses not lived, choices not made, and truths buried under centuries of sanctioned forgetting. Children born during that age carried strange marks, spirals beneath their tongues, constellations behind their eyes. Philosophers abandoned their schools to wander the earth in search of the Tower of Light, but it could no longer be found. Elysiara herself fell silent, her presence faded, or perhaps fulfilled. For Kallistratos had not destroyed the world, nor had he saved it. He had revealed it, unveiled the myth beneath the stone, the god beneath the name, the soul beneath the silence. Temples rose not of marble, but of memory, built where people remembered deeply enough. And sometimes, just sometimes, if the stars aligned and the world held its breath, he could be seen standing at the edge of vision, smiling like someone who had read the last page of the story and found peace in the mystery. And so it was that the world became myth once more, not through destruction, but remembrance, not through war, but awakening. Kallistratos' tale passed into silence, then into song, and finally into being. No longer told by mortals, but felt, in the way the stars tilted slightly in winter, or how the sea paused between waves. He became the guardian not of fate, but of choice, the whisper in the dark that asked, "Do you remember who you were before the world told you?" The spiral, once a mark upon flesh, now adorned the sky, eternally turning. In every telling of the story, the ending changed slightly, not because the story was unsure, but because memory is alive. And in every version, there's a boy who looks at the stars and wonders if they're looking back. They are, and somewhere, within the folds of night, Kallistratos still walks, not to be found, but to be remembered.